All right, I'm a little biased because elections are what I do, right? And I think that the clerks and the poll workers that are performing these duties each and every year are doing a fantastic job. Is there always room for continuous improvement? Always. It's one of my favorite topics also. But I really do have confidence in the process and the procedures that we are doing in elections. One of the things, as you were kind of introducing, is I think semantics matter, the word choices that we use when we talk about elections, counting versus processing. So the Monday processing bill is strictly that, processing those absentee ballot certificate envelopes. We're not counting anything. Results won't be available prior to the 8 p.m. deadline on election day, things like that. So we are very careful and cognizant of our word choices when we talk about elections too, because we want to make sure that the information we always give is accurate. There's enough room for confusion when you don't do this on the day-to-day. So we want the general public to know that we are very cognizant of their faith in the processes and the procedures that we get to carry out.
Let's just go down the line. Representative Krug?
Sure. First, I think leadership matters, right? And to build on what Kim had said, it's about how we talk about elections, it's how we interact with people, it's who we take advice from when we're crafting legislation, it's how we work together on the committee to get things done, it's how we talk to each other on the floor when we're debating bills and making sure that when they get done out of the Assembly or the Senate and they get to the governor's desk, that we've had conversation. I mean, that's all leadership, right? And when you look at those results, on where we've been to where we're going, you see a trend line in confidence building, you see a trend line in trust in election officials increasing. Those are the reasons we ask the clerks to tell us what really needs to be changed. And then we take those back into the political world and say, how do we get this done? So I think for the most part, I think what Lee and I embarked on 2 years ago is working. And I think that's something that we can be proud of and that we can build on. Not only just as legislators, but as everybody in this room, being professionals in it, being on the edges of it, wherever you are, just to know that the input that we're getting matters, and that the input that you're giving is actually turning into results.
Welcome to the 52nd. I had to say that. Yeah, I agree with both of the other panelists right now. I think going back to words matter is really important, and I think that folks look to public figures like Scott and I, and they listen to what we say about elections and how they're administered and how they're run and what we think of clerks and whether or not we value them. And the two of us have been able to model that respectful language and establish that, yes, we trust in our Wisconsin elections, yes, we trust in our clerks. We know that the work they do is on the up and up. Unfortunately, not all of our peers follow that, and sometimes that can cause issues. If we continue to have elected officials who are themselves undermining elections in terms of our confidence in them and what they're speaking on, we're going to continue to see these seeds of doubt. So hopefully things like this, where we can talk openly and frankly in a bipartisan panel, will help chip away at some of that doubt, and we can continue to move forward.
So I'm going to back up just a little bit to start to explain my position. So I am the representative of one of the co-sponsors here today, the Democracy Defense Project, which was formed as a bipartisan group for purposes of educating the public about election integrity and to help restore their confidence and to help promote changes that we can agree on from a bipartisan perspective that will increase that. There are 4 of us who serve as board members on that, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, I guess you could say. And what we agree on is that election integrity is tremendously important, and people's confidence in elections is tremendously important. So our goals, and it's backed up by the fact that this is the second poll that our organization has actually sponsored and been out in the field with, our goals are to learn what areas the general public has concerns with and what the general public thinks we can do to help alleviate those concerns. The bottom line is we want to make sure we have election integrity, and we want to make sure that people in the general public believe we have election integrity so that they'll get out there and vote, and our system will continue to work the way that it should. I believe our polling has indicated that the general public, more all the time, maybe in part to things like this event and some of the things that we've been doing and media that we've been doing, has more and more confidence in our election system all the time. One of the things that if you look at some of these polling data, you can see is Republicans have more confidence in the election data and integrity when Republicans win, and Democrats have more confidence when Democrats win, which tells you that despite the fact that the majority have confidence all the time, that if it weren't for the partisanship of their beliefs, we would have extremely strong numbers of confidence in our elections. So part of the time, one group strongly believes that we have election integrity, and another time, another group strongly believes we have an election integrity. If you combine them at one time or another, without anything changing other than who got elected, the majority of the public does agree. So what we need to do is we need to educate them, which we're working on doing, and we need to make sure that whether areas where we can increase their comfort level, that we need to try to work on those areas. And I think that is one of the things that these slides from our polling data helped us to determine is what areas the general public thinks we need to improve on, and I think most of us have consensus on that. There's some people who believe the world's flat. I mean, the bottom line is there are people, especially with the partisan divide, which maybe isn't as strong as it's been in the history of our country, but it's the strongest it's been in my lifetime. With this partisan divide, we're going to have people who are going to be immovable. I mean, there are Trumpers who are going to believe what President Trump says, no matter what evidence might be out there. And there are going to be people on the exact opposite side who are going to hold just as tight to their beliefs, no matter what evidence may be out there. And that's unfortunate, but it's part of our society that we have to deal with. And if you talk to these, as I have, the two pollsters, the Democrat and the Republican alike, they say when you can get 70% to agree on anything, that's an amazing landslide. And when you look at a number of the issues that we have, the significant issues on our polling in these slides, you will find that we have far in excess of 70% agreeing on some very significant issues and changes that we think can be made.
It was really apparent, and it's been apparent for 4 years that, this isn't just a Wisconsin phenomenon. When I travel the country and talk at NCSL or CSG or at ALEC or go to other conferences and talk to other legislators, other secretaries of state, other election officials, the reforms that we try to put into place in Wisconsin that have been done 20 years ago in another Republican state, they look at us like, why can't you get that done? Like, why is that controversial? I'm like, well, it just is because it is. But in Florida, when you do pre-processing of absentee ballots 2 weeks before the election happens, and Republicans in Florida have never had an issue with it. When you try to look at how that works in Florida versus how it works in Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania having the same exact arguments we're having right now on the same exact issues, you could tell that there is a coordinated effort from certain groups to say, no, we're not going to make these reforms because we want to protect a certain narrative, right? So as JB mentioned, there's, where you see these numbers come down of the 22 to 25% who are still not quite there is a solid 6% who are just never going to get there, right? But the rest we can start peeling away, and you can see the results that they have been peeling away the last few years. But it's not just a Wisconsin issue. I mean, you see it in Pennsylvania, you see it in Georgia, you see it in Arizona, you see it in Michigan, and guess what? Those are the swing states, right? So there's always this coordinated effort, whether it's social media driven or other agencies or people that drive that narrative, it's always going to be somewhere in the background. No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't anymore. That's right.
Okay,
Yeah,
so Kim, why is it a good thing?
So one of the things that I think the public has said to us over the last 4 years is, we want to see what you're doing, right?
Transparency.
We want transparency. They also want integrity, right? I can be as transparent as I want to be, but I have to act with integrity. So I always like to say people want integrity in their elections, not just that transparency. But when you look at Monday processing, one of the things that I think is a huge plus in that column is on election day at 7 a.m. under current law, you can start processing those absentee ballots. And those observers that are coming out to watch that process are also trying to observe all the other processes of election day, right? If we could move that to the Monday before, okay, there's a couple of things that we'd be able to accomplish. One, that transparency and integrity is going to be even easier to see, welcome, because you're not going to be dividing your attention. So when you have your observers come out, they're going to know we are starting in this jurisdiction at this time, and we're going to send our observers out there. Okay, they're going to be able to concentrate on that process. Your election workers are going to be able to concentrate on that process. Their attention isn't going to be divided somewhere else. In smaller municipalities, like in Oconto County, you have poll workers not only processing their absentees on election day, but they're also doing the day-to-day activities of election day. So having that happen earlier. And also, people want information now. They don't want to wait anymore. We are not the delayed gratification world that we keep telling our children they've got to learn to adapt to, right? It's just not ever coming back, okay? So they want to go to bed on election night knowing the results of those elections. And by doing that processing on Monday, okay, we're still not giving you results till 8 p.m. on Tuesday, but doing that processing would allow people to go to bed Tuesday night knowing the results of those elections. And I think those two are the big key points.
But doing them when there's observers present.
Everything that we do is observer present.
Okay.
Can you
All right,
outline
so-
for people, can she explain to
Sure.
people what processing means so they know
Yeah,
exactly?
explain to me, because I got it wrong. Tell me why I was wrong.
Now I'm shaking because every municipal clerk is going, that's my job, not the county. So, but from the county perspective, because we don't actually get to be there on election day, right? We're doing the county's role. But from the municipality role, the processing of those absentee certificate envelopes, they're making sure. So I think I want to back up one thing, is that when a voter makes the request for the absentee ballot, that's tracked. So we know who we've issued those absentee ballots to. I think that's really important for the public to understand. It's not just you make this ask and we send you one and we wonder if it's ever going to come back. We know, we've tracked that, okay? So when one comes back, you can go out on WisVote and you can see my ballot has been sent, my ballot has been received back with my municipal clerk, okay? Now it's going to come to that processing. So did the voter remember to sign the certificate envelope? Did they show photo ID? Because you're going to look for the clerk's initials up in the upper right-hand corner. You got to think of where the outline of the ballot. So are we going to see those initials? Did the voter sign? Did the witness sign, print their name, put their address? All those things, the very first thing they're doing is making sure that the certificate envelope is complete, that they're not missing anything, okay? If they are, then there's a process for that clerk to reach out to that voter and their original witness to come in and fix that, okay? But that would be allowable on that Monday, okay? They're going to then put, I mean, our clerks are already doing a lot of that, right? They're already looking for all that stuff before election day. They're putting them in alphabetical order. They're doing all the steps to make Tuesday as flow as well as it possibly can. But those are the things that you're looking to process. You're going to give them the voter number. You're going to be able to put them in a tabulator, okay? But you're not counting them. And I think that's the hanging, that's what people get hung up on, is are they going to know who won, and then we're going to know we need to turn out this many voters on election day. That information isn't part of that processing.
Right, and this, you know, when I
Does that
first
answer your
started as a
question?
political reporter, we didn't hardly worry about absentee ballots because, you know, there wasn't a lot of in-person early voting, right? It wasn't pushed by candidates and the parties. So it is a relatively recent phenomenon.
And if I can just
Yeah, go ahead.
weigh in, also, Wisconsin doesn't have true early voting at this time, okay? So what you see in the media or in other states, things like that, what Wisconsin has is in-person absentee. That's what we call early voting around here. So whether you're doing it by mail or doing it in person with your clerk, the process that you're following is exactly the same. It's still, you're gonna get that ballot, you're gonna put it in the certificate envelope, your clerk may be your witness instead of a spouse or a neighbor, but everything that is going through, so when we use those are some of those semantics I guess I get a little caught up on, is it's that in-person absentee or by mail absentee.
Scott's laughing because he's, I would call the architect of it previous session. So what happens is that, you know, I as a Democrat am interested in a clean bill that would have, you know, the ability to process ballots on the Monday before the Tuesday election. in order to get things through in a very divided legislature, and I'll just focus on the Assembly for right now, there may be other components to a bill that need to be included to make certain members comfortable with supporting a bill. So Scott worked on a number of those things. He and I worked together negotiating what we could stomach, what we couldn't. Bill got a little bigger than I think I would have liked, to be honest. But then we have to contend with the Senate. And right now, I think if you pay any attention to the news, it's certainly not improved. The Senate is even more divided in some ways than the Assembly. And while we were able to pass this bill, while we were able to make the case to our various caucuses that this is the right thing to do, that this makes sense, that this is going to help instill everybody's confidence in elections and remove the perception that there are something nefarious going on with ballot dumps, et cetera, we were not able to make that happen in the Senate. And I think that is, again, where we are. And unfortunately, some of those voices in the Senate have also sort of infiltrated the Republican Party and their platform, which has added another layer of challenge. So I'm sure Scott's going to want to add a little bit more to this, but I think I did a pretty good job summarizing.
So we are not walking out of the state capitol upon adjournment until we have a Monday processing bill introduced in the state assembly, period. The bill's coming, all right? The challenge, like Lee had said, is what does that bill look like? The version that we passed in the state assembly on a voice vote for anybody that doesn't know, that's a unanimous support, right? Unless somebody goes up and registers after the fact, something like that. Voice vote, easy in the state assembly. It's gotten a little more complicated this session in the assembly, not much. I think we're still at the 50 vote threshold in my caucus at least, and I'm sure we've got plenty of support in the Democrat caucus in the assembly. The Senate caucus is a challenge right now because, like Lee had mentioned, if you watched the news and heard anything about the last couple of days, we're in the throes of trying to negotiate a state budget where the Republican state assembly and the Democrat governor of the state of Wisconsin have said, I think we're pretty much in the same spot. We could probably get this done. State Senate's not quite there right now, so we're kind of in the same spot with the state budget as we are with the Monday bill, trying to figure out that path forward with the state Senate. And what that path looks like, that means more things get added to a bill. I don't know how many. We did present the governor's office with a list of about 10 or 12 different things that could possibly end up in there, just to kind of get a precursor and an idea where they might be on some other correlated issues that might end up in the bill. So we're already trying to work behind the scenes to say, hey, if this had to end up here, would you be okay with this governor's office? Because you need to get a signature. Once we get that back, we go back to the caucuses in the Democrat Senate and Democrat Assembly and say, hey, I think we might have something here. If you're okay with this too, we might have something that can be workable. But there's no way that I'm walking out of that building this session without introducing this bill. So it's taken a while. I wanted to do it in April. I wanted to get the Supreme Court election out of the way. Things just didn't quite take the turns they wanted to take or needed to take in April. But it's going to happen, and we're going to have to talk about this again. Whether people are comfortable with it in the building or not, they're going to have to deal with it again.
But when this would likely, you wouldn't want to do this in an election year, right? You would want to do it in the fall of this year.
Yeah, the prime time to do this is now, right? Because we don't have the statewide election again until the next Supreme Court race in April. A lot of the consternation we heard from people in the Capitol last session was, it's too close to the election, we don't want to do it now. So just try and take all of those excuses away to try to get this bill introduced June, July for public hearings in the Assembly and the Senate in September, hopefully, to give us time by January, February when we leave the building next year to actually have it done. So a timeline, it changed a little bit from earlier, but I think to have hearings in September makes the most sense because everybody's done with summer stuff, they're engaged again, they're having conversations. So that's the goal, is to have this bill introduced to have some hearings in September.
I think, specifically with absentee voting, the clerks are doing those things now. They are reviewing those ballot certificate envelopes and making sure that everything is copacetic before it goes to the polling place, right? Making sure that their WIS vote data is most up to date, things like that. So I think a lot of those things are being done. I think the teamwork that we've seen the last couple of years between the clerks, the Elections Commission, our legislative I do have to give a thank you because it is a different environment for us right now. Do we feel appreciated? I think yes, for the most part we do. Yeah, high five on that one. I do feel supported as a clerk. I don't feel like, and I hope none of our, especially municipal clerks, ever feel that they're in this alone, because there is a network out there and we support one another. So when you talk about what can we be doing, you're seeing a lot of that, but kudos to the voters too for also getting a little bit more involved. We're seeing observers. They're a huge part, they're in statute. They're part of the process. This isn't a new statute. Observers aren't new to the process. They've always been part of the process.
There's a new rule going through on that.
Yeah.
If I could comment on that, because I also sit on Joint Committee for Review of Administrative Rules, so we got to listen to that rule, and that's going to go into effect shortly. I know there's arguments about whether or not rules should go through the legislative process, et cetera. I'm going to set that aside to just talk about the fact that now there is very clear guidance. Prior, we were hearing things of election observers being denied seating, all sorts, not able to go to the bathroom. If somebody's there to observe, regardless of where they fall down, they should be able to observe according to, the rules. And so now we have those clear rules. And we also have a clear process where if somebody feels aggrieved, if they feel that they were in some way denied access to observe, there is a clear process that's outlined. So I'm sure Scott will say that the rule isn't perfect, but the rule now gives us a document, a guideline that we can refer to. I'm not sure what the side talk is, but I'll give you an opportunity.
Before you give him that one.
Okay.
I just want to back up on that one. So when we talk about those processes and procedures and observers being part of that process, I think that is part of the beauty of seeing these polling numbers going up, is because when we engage with observers, I know at least when we train up in my county, one of the things that we do is we're welcoming. We want you to come observe so that you can tell everybody the good work that we're doing. So if your eyes are there, you can see it, and we can say this was the observer that was in the room with us and saw the work that we did. So I think that for the majority of clerks, yes, it can be a little intimidating when someone walks in, but when you approach that with they're there to help me do my job and show everyone that I'm doing it right, I think when you go in with that frame of reference and from that mindset, observers are very welcome in polling places.
Okay, right. It shouldn't have been overly difficult. And I think in the end, my preference in the political climate we're in right now is to have legislative solutions versus administrative solutions, because I know where the public is on WEC deciding this or WEC deciding that. And my objection to the rules process that was ongoing on observers in committee was just for the fact that I think we're in a place that's good enough in the committee right now that legislatively we could take WEC suggestions and turn them into legislation and make it more codified, and we can still work on that. But getting back to the other point about what legislation can do versus what other people can do, I think if we don't see a Monday processing bill get done, we've already worked with Milwaukee to say, hey, if this bill doesn't happen, the other thing you can do is we can help you figure out a way to hire more people, buy more machines, get the process started early, because in April when I observed at Central Count, we actually got them to start right at 7 o'clock in the morning instead of waiting until 8:30 or 9 o'clock, right? So pushing them a little bit more, say, hey, if it comes down to it and you're not seeing a bill coming, people, machines, timing, those all work. I'd give it over to JB to talk about this a little bit more too, because education is a huge component of what we can do besides legislation.
All right, the politics so complicated. The bottom line is politics are not always an honorable game. There are many, if not most, of elected officials and politicians and candidates who try to be as straight up as they can, and there are others who are trying to game the system and basically say they lost because the election was stolen or something nefarious was done because they couldn't have possibly lost on their own. Obviously, all of us who have been elected or are elected have to have some level of an ego, or you wouldn't allow yourself to be placed on the ballot in the first place. And yeah, I know I've insulted you all now, but I included myself. You did, though. But there are various levels. For instance, and I'll get back to the Monday processing. So it's very difficult to argue, if you know all of the facts and the evidence, that the Monday processing affects elections. However, despite the fact that many candidates, if not most or all candidates, know that, there have been some, as recently as this election, who will claim that the victory got stolen from them because of a election night after hours ballot dump in Milwaukee County, which they know all too well was just the later tabulating of the votes because the absentee ballots couldn't be processed in time to have a result that night, and so they call it a ballot dump. A lot of that, I think, is to kind of rally their partisans, their supporters. A lot of it maybe is to make themselves feel better. I don't know what the rationale is, but I think that's part of the way that politics interferes. Now I'll get back to kind of the subject matter that we were on that I was about to talk about, and Representative Krug threw me a wonderful segue, and that's education. I mean, the Democracy Defense Project was formed first and foremost as an educational entity, because there are so many things such as this Monday bill that, albeit a no-brainer in my mind, and it's a no-brainer for the ease of helping election officials do their job and giving people results faster as they wish to have them. But it is more than anything a problem with voter confidence. People listening to elected or non-elected officials saying there was a ballot dump when there wasn't, and people actually believing in the system and that it works well. So we need to educate voters, and if there's something we can do short of legislative or administrative changes, we think that's what it is. And it's not just on this subject, it's on many other subject matters as well within the election integrity process. We need to make sure people understand how the system works. You look at polling data that we've had, and there are an awful lot of people who said they would have more confidence in election integrity in Wisconsin if voter ID was required. It is required, has been required for quite some time, yet there are people who don't have confidence in the system because they don't think it is required. It's as simple as that. There are many people in the electorate who don't understand how the system works, why it works, and that it really does work, and they need to be educated. It's something that we're working on. I will take this opportunity also to give a shout out. One was given to the legislators. I'll give one to the clerks. Our polling shows that voter confidence in the clerks and election volunteers has gone up as well. And I think that the credit for that is owed almost entirely to them because they have opened their doors. They say, you don't trust how the system works? Come in and watch. We'll show you how the system works. We'll walk you through the system. They're doing everything in their power above and beyond what they get paid to do on a daily basis to try to restore confidence in the voters. And I give them tremendous credit for that. Well, I'll start first, and then we'll give it to the legislators. Hopefully, since they're serving on the committee, there's a lot of things on their list. But on ours, as Democracy Defense Project, is two things that we focused on based upon public input and basically the collective knowledge of the Republicans and Democrats and our experience who are serving on the board, is not just simple solutions such as the ballot processing, but the uniformity of rules for ballot drop boxes. We think those will occur as well, and we hope they will. So there is great debate over the need for ballot drop boxes or whether they should have been legal, this or that. The bottom line is they had been determined to be legal. They had been utilized throughout the state of Wisconsin during the last election process. The problem we have in making sure that voters have confidence in the system, the uniformity of the system, is that you may have ballot drop boxes in some municipalities and not in others. Therefore, it could be argued at least there is greater ease of casting your ballot in one municipality over another. That certainly is going to erode voter confidence. There are some ballot drop boxes that are more secure locations or secured, physically secured better than in other places. That's going to affect voter confidence. So one of the things that we believe needs to be done and that we learned was strongly supported in our polling is to have some uniformity of rules. Ballot drop boxes here's how they're used, here's how they're implemented, here's how they're secured, and it's done uniformly throughout the state of Wisconsin. That's something that we as Democracy Defense Project believe is something important to try to advance for not only short-term but long-term change when it comes to voter uniformity and voter confidence.
Yes, some of our municipalities do utilize them, but I think that also goes back to the education of the process too. I like to share from Oconto County's perspective on this one. The people that want the drop boxes the most, the phone calls I get, are Republicans. They want to go to their polling location ahead of Election Day and put it in the drop box so that they know it's been received. And that's not a slam on the USPS. They are doing their very best, okay? But people want that control. So yes, they want it mailed to them. Maybe they didn't want to make an appointment with their clerk, but the people that have reached out to me that said, I need to be able to return this or allow my spouse to return because I'm not going to be in town. I made my request. There's just no time. I got called out of town for work, okay? There's nothing more American than being able to pick up yourself and go get a job, right? I just can't see that we're gonna tell somebody, an over-the-road truck driver, you can't be there on Election Day, so either your voice isn't gonna be heard at the polling place or you're not gonna be able to take that load, okay? So they want to be able to make that request. Their clerk's going to mail it to them, and they want to know that it was received in time. So those drop boxes and the security of those. But the uniformity of rules is what's going to build that voter confidence, okay? So yes, I'm a proponent of this.
So Senator Knodel, well then Senator Knodel, he's state rep now, he and I wrote a bill last session for some uniformity and rules with drop boxes. Didn't introduce it last session, but we will this session. We're going to take a real strong look at what WEC's guidance is currently and try to codify as much as possible. WEC did a good job trying to say, okay, this is how we should use drop boxes. This is where they should be located. Their challenge in creating an administrative rule for that, obviously the rulemaking process being so long, rulemaking process having come to the legislature, court cases saying we don't know what administrative rulemaking is going to look like. So I think, again, I'm going to keep saying it's the legislature's role, and I think it's going to be our role this session, is to take as much of that guidance as possible, add in some of those security features, but then on the backside of it, we have to be able to fund municipalities being able to do those things. We can't just say, go out and do it when we're already stretching your budgets, and then not come back and say, okay, we've got a fund that you can tap into. And, future trends tell me that, absentee voting is going nowhere. Photo ID's going nowhere. I mean, we've got to figure out how to make sure that all of these things work together. We know that we've got to solve ongoing problems, whether it's verifying citizenship some point, somehow, through data sharing bills. I mean, all of these different smaller components that have never risen to the top before have to be dealt with legislatively and soon to keep that confidence building. So yes, drop boxes, Lee and I have agreed on it, even in committee out loud, where I've said committee members on my side, it's safer to take it to the drop box at the courthouse or at the town hall than it is to put it in my own mailbox into my driveway. If we can just think about common sense ideas, we can get some of these things done.
Well, I mean, I think for me, my focus is always going to be on voter forward legislation, putting the voter first, making sure the voter has easy access to make their voice heard. So absolutely, we need ballot drop boxes. I do understand how people can be twitchy about how they may vary from county to county or municipality to municipality. I think Scott and I have talked kind of off the record and privately about what that might look like in a way that is amenable to both parties. But going back to what she said as well, I mean, not allowing somebody's daughter or spouse to drop off a ballot because they've missed the ability to do so in a timely fashion by U.S. mail, I think we need to go back and visit that. I mean, I myself have an 82-year-old mother whose mobility varies from day to day, and if she doesn't get that in time, I am no longer able to, well, certainly if I was on the ballot, I wouldn't, but I would no longer be able to do that for her, or she would no longer be able to have anybody. So I think that's really important, and I think that anything that we work on, where Scott has been good, but where we often push back is, are we thinking of all voters? Are we thinking of voters with a disability? Are we thinking of voters that don't have access to public transportation? Are we thinking of voters who may have a hard time accessing their birth certificate? We need to think about all voters and not just the privileged perspective that we may have sitting on that committee of being somebody who usually has access, usually has the ability to get this stuff very easily.
Since you've asked me the more political questions, even though I'm not the only non-politician on this panel.
No, but you're a former, so you can say anything.
Yeah, that's right. All we've talked about and what we're talking about here is promoting uniform rules or uniform legislation. There's still great contention over whether ballot drop boxes should be used or not. Obviously, there are people who strongly oppose them, and I don't think we need to get into the debate as to whether we should or shouldn't have them. The bottom line is we do. The problem you end up having politically, as you do with some other things, is the appearances. So even if you could get a clean bill, which is almost impossible on anything nowadays, that is just about uniformity of ballot drop boxes, and you, as somebody who's opposed to ballot drop boxes, votes for it because you're like me and you think, well, if we're going to have them, let's at least have them uniform. It can be used against you or appear as though you are in favor of the ballot drop boxes. So that's where we really have to educate again and clarify. The polling question isn't whether you're in favor of ballot drop boxes, it's whether you're in favor of the uniformity of rules for them. And I think it's those sort of educational points of clarity that we really have to try to pound home to voters, and then we don't have to worry about so much about elected officials, hopefully, if the voters understand what they're talking about.
I just want to add one point to all of this is, when you have the uniformity of rules, I'm so in favor of this, so thank you so much for working together. But the other part that I think the public needs to also know is, and I loved your word that they get a little twitchy about the drop boxes because they don't understand how they work, right? The security around them, funding for security, all those kind of things. But remember what I said before was when we issue that absentee ballot, we're tracking that and when that comes back. So there's not this dump. We're not stuffing ballot boxes. Go ahead, make as many photocopies as you want. When we check you in, we have a reconciliation list, and not just for your absentee ballots. It's all after election. We are reconciling every single point of elections. So it's not that I can just ballot dump in the middle of the night and throw an extra 100 in there. I've got to have those voters to back that up. I've got to have the paper trail that shows all of this. And absentee voting has a very strict paper trail. So I think I want to make sure that people understand that when they do talk about absentee voting and drop boxes. I think that gets lost a little bit in there.
Yeah, let me start with Florida. I have said this for years. Like if I had a wish list and I was the one with the pen in the East Wing and the legislature sent me a bill that would Floridize, quote unquote, not a word, Wisconsin elections a little bit, I think there's a lot of things in that model that would be bipartisan. I would like to see us get to the point where we can have 16 and 17-year-olds pre-register. I would like to also then see us get to the point where we don't have same... Hold on, let me just tell you how the trade works and what a clean bill does and the difference. Like to get to that, I have to have a process in place where we maybe go to automatic voter registration or motor voter instead of same-day registration. Like there's so many different trade-offs to get all the things that we need that Florida does that Wisconsin can't. When it comes to voter rolls, again, if I had my way, we would have a $25 million inflection into WEC to upgrade their system to have a historical system for non-active voters and an active voter list, period. That costs a lot of money to even start, right? That is probably a $500 million project overall to try to create an entire new system. So we're having those types of conversations, but first it takes money, it takes political will, and it takes legislators wanting to do all these things. I would love us to get to a much more Florida model, but we can't do that until we fill in what I call the hole that we have right now. Like we get back to a base that we have trust and security and confidence, then we can totally start reforming ideas. Because in the end, when we've got 55 to 60% turnover in municipal clerks in the last 5 to 7 years, we have an opportunity right now to either change how we function or increase education for new clerks coming in? Because we've seen a lot of the institutional knowledge leave. Now we've got a lot of people who are hungry for ideas and change.
So
Answer to that.
I guess, I mean, it's easier for me to look at a clean bill, which would simply say, we're going to allow for processing on the Monday before an election and explain that process. And it's easy for me to do that because I'm a legislator in the minority. I don't need to have other elements, tools, et cetera, to get people on board. But unfortunately, we are in an environment where we just can't seem to say, let's take one issue at a time. They get lumped together and it becomes very political. It's deeply, deeply frustrating. I do want to mention one thing about voter ID, now that it's enshrined in the Constitution. One of the primary reasons that you probably heard Democrats against that was, number one, it's already state law. And I don't think we should be legislating by changing the Constitution. And number two, we still have significant barriers for certain individuals to get that ID. I mean, we can talk about how many DMVs are even open. We can talk about how many municipalities do not have public transportation. Now, these may be a minority of Wisconsinites, but we have to make sure that every eligible voter in Wisconsin has that opportunity to do that. I'm hoping to work with Scott, now that that is enshrined, to make sure that we are doing what we need to do, whether it be for DMVs, whether it be for ways to make voting accessible for individuals where it is currently not because they're living with a disability. We have that enshrined now, so we got to remove those barriers or we are not doing what is right for democracy.
Okay, so what about, do you like the Florida model, Representative Snodgrass?
I am really reticent to say I want to model anything in Florida. As a Wisconsin legislator.
How about the weather, at least?
You know, even the weather is only good like 3 months out of the year. I think we're seeing some of them come here because our weather is more favorable. So I'm going to say no comment on that.
I'm going to just share an example on the voter roll, okay? And I think this is, again, those semantics. So you're talking, we have in our WisVote system, everyone that's ever registered to vote, okay? My mother's deceased, but I can still click a box that says, tell me if she ever voted in the state of Wisconsin, and I can find her inactive voter roll. So when you talk about the population of the state of Wisconsin and a voter roll that's higher, you have to remember that people are using that term voter roll, and they're all encompassing. We recently had in Oconto County a clerk that went through their poll list, because this is what our clerks do and our poll workers on election day. They go through and say, let's try to clean this up. Did anyone pass away that we know they've passed away? And we have a system that says, yes, my mother, since we're recording, I'm not going to put names out there, but she passes away, okay? And someone says, we know this. We can find that obituary. We can get a family member. There's a lot of ways to remove them from that poll list, the active poll list, the one that's being printed. But what we had a very specific situation was, Clerk reached out to me and said, this voter, she doesn't live here anymore. Why is she still on our poll book? Okay? Two things. One, we all knew that she got married. And when she registered in her new municipality, she filled out her voter registration with her new last name and did not put, I was previously registered under this name at this address. So that new clerk had no way of knowing to go merge those two records so that the voter history follows. Because my voter history when I was Kim Miller followed me into Kim Pytleski because I did fill that form out properly. The second thing is, not everybody's showing up to vote every election. They're coming out every 4 years. My first term as clerk, I remember I was so excited. I went to one of the polling places and I wasn't on the ballot, just so you know. I was there to be an assistant. But somebody said, good for 4 more years. And I thought, oh, that's such a shame. Because the local elections, that's where my passion's at. Those spring elections, please come out and vote those. But that person, so you have the right to remain on that voter roll for 4 years before, if you haven't voted in that time, then we're going to remove you, right? And we have a process for that. But that's one of the things that people aren't seeing is that voter roll gets cleaned up every 4 years, and it's a rolling cleanup. But when people don't let us know, my name's changed, I've moved, you should have pulled me from over there, they're sitting out there. But that person still only voted once. And I think that's really, really important that when we talk about our voter rolls, that we do it very carefully about the situation we're in with each voter. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I hope it answers the question that you had. I do hear you there, and if I can just give a little pushback. So we, under current law, allow a voter to request an absentee ballot up till 5 p.m. the Thursday before an election. If you're lucky, you're going to receive that ballot before Election Day, okay? If you're lucky, you'll receive it before Election Day. How are you going to get it back to have your voice heard? So if our legislature is writing statute that allows voters to make that request, they are expecting that if I have followed all the rules you have given me, my voice still gets to be heard. And there's just not enough time, physical hours, to allow the back and forth there. So that's where I think the drop boxes serve a purpose.
This gets back to, I think, and I can't speak for any given representative or senator on either side of the aisle or anything else. Unfortunately, when you go to enshrine in the Constitution photo ID, I was as strong a supporter of photo ID for voting as anybody could have possibly been when I was Attorney General, and I could get into all the reasons why, but we don't need to. But I was opposed to making it a constitutional amendment. The rationale for doing so is that future legislatures can't take that away and change it when it's a popular issue. The flip side is it's so damn popular that there's almost impossible to believe the legislature would ever change it back. My belief is the reason things like that are put on the ballot to make it a constitutional amendment is because it helps drive voter turnout for the people who are in favor of voter ID, which would help the Republican Party or the Republican candidates win in given elections. You can say the same thing one way or the other about legalizing marijuana. You can say the same thing about same-sex marriage amendments being put on the ballot. It's done by partisans on both sides of the political aisle in different ways at different times, but my belief is that for the most part, and there are exceptions. I mean, there's arguments to be made on the examples I brought up. That's the problem with using hypotheticals or examples. But some of the driving factor behind those things has to do with driving your voters to the polls.
So let me dive into it a little bit. So in the legislature, in my 14 years, I've come to realize that there are many things that I want to get done that I cannot get done unless other things happen, right? So there are, every legislative session, say a dozen ideas that I'm not a huge fan of, but I know that legislator is going to be somebody that needs to support me on something I want to do as well, right? That's the dirty side of politics, is that sometimes I have to do things in order to get the good things done too. When it comes to enshrining photo ID in the Constitution, like JB said, it was an 80% issue already, and yes, there were people, then the train was on the tracks. So all right, we're gonna get this done, but we're not gonna distract us from other things. When you talk about citizenship, that's the one I really wanted to dive into. It is required that we are citizens of our municipalities, of our jurisdictions, of our state, of our country to vote in elections. There is a segment of the population that I took on this fight for to say, hey, I'm going to figure out whether this actually is a problem or whether it really isn't a problem. So that's what I took on this whole initiative for these last year and a half that I've been arguing with the DOT, going through court cases, and just saying, we could probably do a little bit better. Just to have our data sharing agreements updated, just to know that everything is completed and signed and articulated every 2 years between DOT, DHS, DOC, and the Wisconsin Elections Commission. On the back end of it though, whether it's a problem or not, I should not have to run into agencies telling me I cannot have information to show people whether it's really a problem or whether it's not. So the fight that I took on and ran into was to say, hey, I have a legislative prerogative to know what the information is so I can go back to my constituents and say this is exactly what happened and this is exactly what did not happen. And that's why we took on the Monday idea, so I could tell people this is not what's happening, we're fixing it. If non-citizen voting really isn't happening, the agencies should not have a problem sharing information to show me that it's really not happening. And so that's the fight we're having on citizenship right now. There's not been a bill. There's nothing coming up directly in legislation to say that we're going to create something different. But at the same time, the agencies should not be standing in the way of getting the information to the legislature.
And I would say that and I'm going to put you on the spot. It's not happening. It's really not.
That's fine. I
So
still have to show
why
it.
are we continuing to focus our energy on mitigating problems that are not problems? And so this is when we have fun dialogues together, because we actually agree on a lot. What we don't agree on always is how to get there. And that is the joy of governing. Well, I mean, that was a budget ask of mine in the governor's budget. I know, and I'll let Rep. Krug, Scott, talk about this. You know, you're absolutely right. I mean, if we want certain things, we're going to have to set aside money, state money, for them to be able to do this. And some of that's security issues, some of that's, you know, absentee ballot, in-person absentee hours, some of that is badger books. We want to make sure that they can do what they need to do efficiently and accurately. This guy has a better line to budget influence than I do right now, so I'll let him speak to that.
Easy answer to anything sum sufficient in the state budget is no. That's the problem we have in the state budget process right now, is there is not enough money for anything to be sum sufficient.
Well, the legislature is sufficient.
Or the legislature, the judicial branch, the executive branch, we're
Right.
sum sufficient because we have to exist, right?
Yeah, but
Right.
I'd say you're saying operational,
Right.
some sufficient is not that's why you have
Right.
budgets.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we're going through the budget process right now. And I can tell you, in the Wisconsin Election Commission budget papers that Joint Finance was going to take up a couple weeks ago, was going to take up again yesterday, that still have not gotten done, there will be increased money into security costs. There will be increased money into infrastructure costs. You know, those administrative things will be there. When it comes back to the municipalities, the only thing that I've asked for money for are the things that I proposed legislation on, whether it's increased hours for in-person absentee voting, where I've said municipalities need to offer more time for people to come. I would never do that without putting in a budget motion to say we need to pay for that. I won't do the same thing when it comes to Dropbox security. I'm not going to say, I need you to put cameras, I need you to store it for 22 months, I need you to do all these things, and not put a budgetary request in for that. So as new ideas come up, budget money always has to come with new proposals. But what we're doing right now, the expectation is that we're going to maintain the levels we're at. Municipalities and counties are going to have to maintain their spending levels, going through their budget processes to accomplish what we're already getting done. Well, I mean, now it's an easy question to answer now. Constitutionally, we're not going to allow private money to fund elections. I mean, that's whether people thought that was an issue back in Brown County during the heyday of all the conspiracy type stuff or not. Constitutionally, we are moving forward as public funded elections only. So that does create a responsibility in the legislature to make sure if we put new initiatives in that we're going to pay for them. But we also should have been more wary about accepting private dollars to fund a public function on anything, let alone elections previous to that.
Representative Krug's rubbing his hands together, but I'm holding the mic, so we didn't get it yet. The power of the purse. I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, on the blue boxes, I can give a perspective on that because I've been there. The ballot drop boxes don't fix the problem that you just described. But what you just described points out the problem that even if you drop it in your local mailbox, it doesn't mean that it's going to get received. And I can tell you firsthand exactly the situation you described. My wife and I and another couple were in Florida for the Supreme Court election. We got mailed ballots by our clerk a month in advance and they never arrived. When we realized a week in advance we had problems, she offered to overnight them. It cost, we had to pay $100 to have 4 ballots overnighted to us. We then had to pay an additional $100 to have the 4 ballots overnighted back. So for 4 of us, we paid $200 to be able to vote in that election. It shows how you can't rely on the Postal Service. Once again, ballot drop boxes wouldn't have fixed that problem, but they do point out the problem with the Postal Service. With regards to uniformity, when it comes to anything, for that matter, uniformity doesn't necessarily mean one size fits all. Uniformity can mean that in the legislation you're given several different options based upon given circumstances. So I think that's important to realize that uniformity and one size fits all aren't synonymous.
One of the challenges in legislation is being able to get the feedback you need before it's time to do a bill, right? So it's become readily apparent that we've got to figure out a way that we know absentee voting is going absolutely nowhere, like I said before. I've got to figure out a way that we can maximize the people's ability to take advantage of it for every voter. Challenge is, in Wisconsin, we are so decentralized. To get input on a municipal election bill, I'd have to reach out to 1,850 some clerks, right? So this one went a little backwards to say, hey, you know what? We're going to put out a bill full well knowing that it's not going to get through the way it's written, period. But do you know how much conversation that created within the municipal clerks finally coming to us and saying, hey, what about me? I got a great story. I've got a little old lady named Ellen, town of Kingston, northern Juneau County. She's been the clerk there for 52 years. There are like 60 registered voters in the town of Kingston. Ellen called me and said, if you make me do one more damn thing, I quit. And I guarantee you, there is nobody else in this town that's going to do this job, so you might as well just dissolve our town because of this. I said, Ellen, how about this? Instead of having a 20-hour requirement for you because you only have 50 registered voters, how about a 5-hour requirement over the 2-week period, where you just have to be there either 1 hour a day during that week or 5 hours on a Saturday, and you can actually just say that we had the doors open. You don't have to meet anybody at home anymore, Ellen. That's the challenge we have right now in this day and age that we live in. Trusting somebody to come to my house as a clerk or to meet them anywhere else besides my office with the possibility of security doesn't exist anymore. So when I offered that back to Ellen, Ellen's like, yeah, I can do that. So then we had other clerks in other villages who said, well, I only have 250 or 300 people. I could use a few more hours. I can't do 20 because I have another job. The village of Coloma, she's a great clerk. She also works for the town of Coloma. She sits in the same office. She said, does that mean I have to sit in that office for 40 hours? I'm like, no, that just means if you have this many population, I can adjust these things too. So if you're 250 and under, so how about 10 hours? You do 10 hours for the town, you do 10 hours for the village. So the legislation, when it comes to committee, that's where we get to draw people out to give that input to say, hey, just because a bill came out a certain way, doesn't mean it's going to happen. Will we have to do this for spring elections? I don't think so. I think we can get to this bill to the point where it said it's a fall election bill for in-person absentee voting hours because the turnout's so much greater in the fall. So there are ideas all along the way, all across the spectrum, that when you come to testify in that bill, I want to hear your input so we can craft it and change it. That'd be great. I wouldn't say that is a goal of the bill, but it also does help draw out our vulnerabilities, where we've already had 60% turnover with municipal clerks over the last few years. So this bill does help us draw out those vulnerabilities to say, is this sustainable? In this day and age where people are just not involved as much as they used to be on anything, is that model sustainable? That's a conversation we get to have now because the bills come forward where municipal clerks are saying, I got to think a little bit more. So I love putting out, and I talked about this in Detroit over the weekend too, is I like putting out some bills sometimes that are just conversation starters. Whether they get signed or not, legislation is always my last priority to force somebody to do something. If legislation helps people solidify what their plan is in their daily lives without me having to force them to do it in a bill, I'm all for it. Like if a clerk realizes or a towns association engages and says, maybe clerks should be in their offices a few more hours a week, maybe we should figure out a way to change our model, it's a great side benefit to bills like this to have all these other conversations because a piece of paper came out saying, I might have to make you do something.
Can I make one comment?
Yeah.
I just want to make one comment about legislation in general. I can tell when a election bill comes to our committee, I can tell when the authors have not had any conversations with anybody who has anything to do with election administration. And I'm not going to call anybody out, but that is lazy legislating. I mean, the goal should be to be bringing forward a bill that has talked to the stakeholders to know what the impact will be regardless of who those stakeholders are. A hearing where Scott and I sit, that is where we hash out these things, get ideas for amendments, maybe find something that we didn't realize in spite of the fact that we maybe talked to the stakeholders in our area. So I think the important thing is, I mean, and he has said to me when he was chairing the committee, I got a bill coming, you're not gonna like it. And I've said, okay, well, I'm gonna pick it apart. And he's like, yep, that's your job. And my job is to bring it forward for my people. So that conversation in that committee is so vital, but I would caution or invite my fellow peers to make sure that when you're bringing a bill forward, talk to the people who are going to be impacted or having to carry out that bill if it becomes law, because that is a step that is sadly often missed, and that wastes all of our time.
I think the more we've talked here, especially with the audience questions, you start to see the differences that do come out amongst the panelists here, and that we don't agree on everything. The fact that we do sit here and agree on such a panoply of things, I think speaks volumes about the importance of the issue and our ability to make progress on that issue. And that's really refreshing in this day and age, that you can have people with different partisan positions who are willing to find things that they do agree upon and to do everything they can to move forward in advancing those issues. And with regards to our elections, it's hard to come up with anything more important than the underpinning of our entire system of government. So I'm pleased with what everybody here is doing, and I thank all the panelists for joining us today.
I find these things refreshing as well, because I think it starts a dialogue that's broader than the ones we may be having in closed doors in the Capitol. I find in these panels that I often agree with those who come from a more conservative or Republican perspective, and I think that is the beauty of democracy. I mean, democracy is about all of us participating in the process and making sure that everybody who legally can has confidence in that process. I know Scott and I have worked really hard on that. We're going to continue to work really hard on that. I appreciate you all being here today. Thank you.
So I think the biggest thing I've learned the last 3 years in the election space is that elections are a proxy for every other issue in the state of Wisconsin, right? Elections are the things that get people talking, but then they stay talking about everything else. So when we can lead in the committee or lead in our leadership or lead in our chambers on issues that people are talking about the most, they get more comfortable talking about everything else. So constituent contacts increase, bipartisanship increases in the other committees because they see we get attention for doing what we're supposed to do. But other chairmen want to get that attention, other ranking members want to get that attention, so they start working together even more. So elections as a proxy is really creating a better Wisconsin for everybody.
You just stole my line.
Word.
He just stole my line. No. I think what I want everyone to leave with is legislation is continuous improvement. Every time a bill is brought forward. So whether it's elections or anything else, and this is where I'm building off of what you said, it is a continually improving process. Wisconsin elections are run very well. Okay, they are. And I hope that you leave today feeling that and that you can go out and share that. And when you run into someone who doesn't share that same feeling, tell them to reach out to their municipal or county clerks. I always use the tagline, clerks, they're your best friend in local government. We don't know everything, but we pretty much know everybody, and we can get you in front of the right people. So when you don't know where to start with your clerk. Whether it's an election question or you want to know something about the Nicolay Forest, okay? We're gonna get you in front of the right people so that you can have your answers heard. And if you don't mind, this isn't where you find your answers, okay? No offense to anyone that posts there.
Unless you're going to the Wish Politics.
Yes, definitely.
It's on already.
That's the plug. Sorry, I missed that one. But elections will always continually improve because we will always look at the process and say, how can we do this better? That's why we signed up to be clerks, because we love the process.